Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Leadership Refinery, where we bring together leaders, experts, change makers to share real lessons behind leadership, culture, and team success. I am Denetra Farrell, founder and CEO of Culture Refinery, where we help organizations optimize the return on their most critical investment, talent. And today I'm really excited to be joined by one of my favorite leaders, Ken Weary, the Chief Operating Officer over at HostAway. And Ken brings such deep experience in cultivating thriving cultures, effective leadership, successful teams, and uniquely all within globally distributed, remote first, fast growing work environments. So he has plenty of gems that I know he's going to be able to drop on us in our conversation today. So, Ken, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Denny. It's awesome to see you again. It's great to catch up and super excited to talk today.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you've had such an incredible leadership journey. And let me just say leadership and life journey, right? But from the leadership perspective, like really about scaling teams across the world in this fully remote environment, really before people were even having the conversation about remote first and super global and all of those things before we even got there. But I would love to back up for a second and take you way back to the early days, to the beginning, maybe when you were a consulting manager, or maybe this wasn't even the first time that you were managing. But if you think back to the very first time you were managing people, if you could do it all over again, what's one thing that you would do differently?
All right. So, you're going to have me air my dirty laundry here. This is, um, there's, yes, I do have stories and management experience before what appears on LinkedIn. My first professional management role was I was a manager of interns
Hmm.
for a nonprofit organization in the Washington D.C. area, and we had a crew of about 10 interns that would cycle through every 4 months, and it was really great job. Loved it. And after starting with this organization, I was then given the responsibility to manage interns, and then later grew more and more responsibility. And I think the biggest lesson that I had to really that scraped my knees a lot in learning because I was just making this rookie mistake left and right, which is learning that managing individuals and leading individuals is if you take it if you take that responsibility as I now have the authority to manage this team, and you start exercising that responsibility as from a position of authority, you're you're you are making a huge mistake. It is super important and so much more impactful to uh, exercise leadership from a perspective of influence than authority. And I didn't know it. I was coming across. I was telling people, "Hey, I need you to do X," and they weren't doing it. And oh my gosh, was I just livid that this person wasn't doing what I told them to do because I'm the boss. What are they doing? And in return, I was becoming the biggest jerk in the room because I had no idea why they weren't doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe they were busy. Maybe they were working on something a lot more important than something that I thought was important. Maybe they were something my boss's boss told them to do, and that happened. And here I am pissed at these people. Like, come on, get off your seat and go and do it. So, the what I began to realize, and later I also went into project management and really began to realize that later of like, oh, I'm working in a cross collaborative environment where I need to exercise influence to convince people in certain cases that something is more important to do than what they're doing, or learn why the thing that I think is the most important really isn't, but it should be the second most important. And so I think that's the biggest mistake I made. And honestly, it took me several years at it before I realized what I was really doing. It's one of those things that a lot of painful lessons around that.
Listen, I ripped the band-aid off. I came with the hard questions up front intentionally. But I agree. I believe that a lot of times when we talk about influence and authority, we talk about influencing when you don't have the authority. But what you called out is so critical, the importance of still leaning towards influence, even when technically you do have the authority. That is so powerful. And it alludes to sort of the power of individual relationships to build trust and connection so that when I ask you to do something, you trust that I'm asking you to do the right thing, or you trust that you can push back and say, hey, but such and such asked me to do this, and we can have a conversation. Oh my gosh. And I think the other thing that I heard you say that this new managers is such a topic that's so close to my heart was that it takes time to figure it out when you're trying to figure it out and learning on the job, right? What works and what doesn't work as you're leading people. There are years that go by, and in the years, you're fumbling and not being at your absolute best, and your team is fumbling a little bit too, and not able to get you're not able to get the most out of them either. And so, yeah, I'm so glad that you called those points out. And I am certain I've worked with people who you manage, so I know that you have evolved uh, over the years. But great lessons. I wonder when you were in when you're in your early days of leadership, what type of development, formal development, did you have, and were there things that that formal development didn't prepare you for?
Yeah. Um, I did. So throughout the various aspects of my career, I was exposed to leadership training. I was exposed to, either in person or online leadership training. Um, I invested a ton in reading. I love to read, and so began reading all kinds of leadership books. My wife would make fun of me left and right because it's like, oh my gosh, you're reading another boring management book, and the and got into a ton of biographies as well. Like, oh, this is an incredible company, an incredible leader. Let me read about them. And so I began to invest both uh, in the office and out of the office in trying to understand different aspects of leadership. And I guess there's a ton of great frameworks out there about either decision making or leadership or different aspects that are in these books or in these management trainings. And really, I think the biggest thing that I learned over time is you gotta tailor all of that information for the situation. You can't just uh, you know, take a look at like Steve Jobs' autobiography, right? The guy was notoriously a jerk at people. People did not like to work with him, but he motivated the heck out of people to build amazing things that still to this day are changing the world. Um, and so there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is it? And so the there's a famous quote by Bruce Lee, who I think it was the aspect of take the what is it? Hold on, I got to find this because uh, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. And ultimately, that's what I inadvertently kind of stumbled into. No one ever taught me that. I through the scraped knees and through this exposure and through this situational aspect, I began to really realize like that's what's super important um, from my perspective that all leaders should apply. You're going to be exposed to incredible things from different leaders that you work around. That's awesome. They're not you.
Mm-hmm.
And what you take to your next job isn't the same company or the same leadership style or the same values or the same culture. So you got to be selective. It's like going to a big buffet and you're looking at all this great food. Don't just go straight to the meat and start chowing down on that. You got to add a little bit of veggies, add a little bit of dessert. And, it's, and so it really is about taking what's useful and applicable to that time, saying the rest just doesn't really work here or isn't applicable or doesn't work for my leadership style or who I am and how I operate, and then make it your own.
Yeah, I love that because one of the things, a couple of things that I heard as you were talking through sort of that approach is one, this intentional ownership of your own development. One of the things that we found when I first launched my coaching practice, before Coach Refinery was even a thing, when I first started coaching, I had found that so many of us rely on our organizations to be the ones to fund all of our development. And we hadn't spent any time, energy, effort doing anything outside of, you got your degree and now you're working and everything else is on the companies that, right, to do it. And this ownership of, if I want to get better, it serves me to be better at this thing that I'm doing. And so I have to be invested and I have to put the time, the effort, the resources into doing it. And then you also described perfectly um, our belief too. We have so many things that we share in terms of values around sort of this refining process. That's even the name of this conversation, right? The leadership refinery. It's not that if the leadership takeover or complete transition, it's what's good in this. Okay, what, let me keep what's good, let me filter out the impurities, and then let me add things into it that makes sense and that can tweak that process based on where it lives. And I think the other thing that you alluded to is that at some point you've got to put it in practice to even know what makes sense, what to keep. We are a consumer economy, and even with knowledge we consume, right? We read all the books, we take all the courses, we do all the things, and it's not until you do something with what you've consumed that it starts to stick. And being able to embed that in the way that you learn and the way that you're developing yourself is really, really important in terms of the effectiveness of that. So great, great lessons. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears slightly here because you have led, really high growth, fully remote teams. You scaled Hotjar from 14 to over 400, over 40 countries. And we know without a doubt that type of growth at that speed, that level of expansion does not come without hurdles and hiccups and challenges and things like that. So when you think about as you were working with Hotjar and scaling that culture, right? Along the way, what were one or two of the toughest leadership decisions you had to make? And what did you take away from those decisions?
So this is an awesome topic that I really love to explore because it, to me, and current role at HostAway, where I'm COO, same thing. I started a year ago. We were 150 people. We're 220. That's very quick growth. And the there's a scaling is hard, and that's what we're talking about doing here, right? It's scaling a business from a startup to a scale up or a mature business, and understanding what that growth is like. It sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes
Mhm,
it's like puberty where it's just like I know I'm in the right skin and in the right place, but it doesn't feel right. It's really awkward because what you put in place as a process or in hiring the right people or the right technology, it needs to change. It needs
mhm,
to evolve, and it needs to be a very organic growing creature faster than a more traditional business. And so I think recognizing that requires that you as a leader are always evolving your own thinking,
mhm,
right? There was the chief operating officer of Automatic, another big remote company with 2,000 people, was recently on a podcast, and he was talking about how he sees his job as needing that he needs to apply to it every year. He needs to requalify for his job every year, and he's been there for like 15 years. Like, that's phenomenal in my mind, and that is absolutely the right way to think. I have to, if I am not evolving at the rate the business is evolving, then I am slowing the business down. And so that scaling is hard. It does mean constant exploration on my part, constant rethinking, constantly replanning. Anything we put in place, I put in place for with the expectation that it can survive for 12 months. If it survives a little bit longer, awesome, but we're going to outgrow it. And so systems, process, and sometimes even people. Um, there are people who love the aspect of the true hard, raw startup. Like,
Hmm.
I want to be and then when it gets to be, when it's two people in a garage, they're awesome. But when it turns into, oh, now we, have formal departments and we have to have gating criteria for different things, they're like, too much structure, not for me. And so I think it's super important as leaders, we recognize that that's the case for those around us. And we also have open conversations about, are they evolving and do they want to evolve to that aspect? Having those conversations with people might seem uncomfortable, but it's empowering to them to be able, if they're feeling it sometimes of like, I like this company, it's a good job, but it's not as fun as it used to be, and it's evolving to something that they're not as happy with. Awesome. By having those conversations and just being honest and open and deliberate without being threatening, without saying, you answer this wrong and you're gone. It's not
Yeah.
like that. It's about having the conversation of development.
Oh, I love that. I love that, right? That notion of preparing yourself to have to apply, to position yourself to ensure that you are capable for the role that you're in the space that it is and where it's evolving right now. That is like a critical mindset shift, I think, that is relevant for leaders, but also relevant for anyone who works a job, especially as we're having these conversations about AI is going to take your job and you're outsourcing this and all of those things, right? The truth of the matter is we have right, wrong, and different, probably wrong. I don't even want to say right, wrong, or indifferent. We have sometimes gotten complacent, and the expertise that served you last year does not serve you if you're not continuing to grow, and you have to own that. Back to the point that we made before, you have to be the one that is driving that and finding that to be important without someone just telling you, okay, here's a skill you need to learn now for your next role, right? You have to own it. Oh my goodness, that's so I love that perspective. And then, the conversation about developing, and this is sort of why you're such an amazing leader, and it's really important, especially when you are dealing in a remote company and folks are dispersed all over, and you've got different values and cultures and backgrounds. The power of those one-on-one conversations is critical. The intentionality, even when you're moving fast, to have those developmental conversations that aren't just what task did you do, how are you moving the needle towards the business objectives, but what is it that you want? What are you, where would you like to go next? What do you need from us to be at your best self? What do we, right? All those types of conversations. I remember my corporate days, and sometimes those, the business requirements would outweigh them, and those would get rescheduled and pushed off or never scheduled at all, and you miss that. So such an amazing and important perspective. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious. Oh, the other thing that I think that came out when you just said that is that the speed of change. So you've got to be agile. You don't have, even when you're making decisions, you don't have time to make the decisions slowly. You still have to decide quickly and know that this thing that I just sort of decided on is going to change. And so deciding quickly in a way that still has some forethought on when it's time to change. How do I ensure the decision that we make today makes it easier for the change to happen? That it, is built with that the fact that it's going to change in mind too. There's all of these things and lessons that come out of that. Oh my goodness. I could honestly just sit there for the rest of the conversation and just like think it through, talk it through, because it's so much. I think when I first engaged Hotjar, you all were maybe just over 100 or so folks, and even in that time, you all had grown to like 250, 260, and then within a year, right, you were at the 400. It's The growth was quick, fast, right? So many things being broken, so many lessons being learned. But one of the things that always stood out to me was that the infrastructure of who we want to be was strong, and how we want to show up and how we want to operate, how we want to work with each other was strong and always being reinforced is one of the things that felt really values aligned for me and my team as we started to work with your organization. It was one of the things that stood out for me as I thought about, who are some of the great leaders that in our day, right, that are actually, in the mix, not the, big super retired guy, but the ones that are in the, sleeves are rolled up and doing the work right now. And I'm like, yeah, Ken is in there. He's doing this and he's building these cultures that, when you talk to folks, it's clear. They say, oh my gosh, this is a great place to work, or this is a great experience, or we truly have built this culture, this thing is true. um and that takes intentionality, right? It's not happenstance. It doesn't happen on accident. And so that,
I will say, if I could just add on that
yeah.
too, like, I know we talked about the rate of change that, it has to happen within the aspects, but you also need to make sure all of your relationships, your partnerships, even your customers, and vendors are all aligned as well. Like, at some point, change happens, and if you don't have the right people to ride with those change, you do need to evolve. And I think that
Mhm.
was one of the great things we had with the partnership with Culture Refinery at Hotjar. Was It was a tremendous alignment during that time of growth and structure and support. So not all vendors were at that stage to be able to help us scale at the right time, the right place, and that's okay. They weren't, doesn't mean that they were the bad vendors or the bad partners, or even in certain cases you outgrow customers as well. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that the interests of both are also diverging a bit. And it's great to have those conversations when that happens, just to make sure that there isn't any concern or bad blood.
Yeah, that's so important. It's um I know you're at HostAway, and I want to learn more about HostAway here soon too. But as I think about, because we worked a little bit with Hotjar, transparency was one of the core values. And so like that, living that out, right? Being able to have those sometimes tough conversations. Sometimes you're saying to a customer, or a vendor, or an employee something that they don't want to hear, but you're saying it in a way that's compassionate, in a way that is honest and truthful, so that they have the data that they need to decide how they move next, right? And there's not this uncertainty and in these questions. I love this. I love this. And I love that ad, because it brings me actually to sort of the next sort of set of questions that I had. Beyond individual leadership, which is what we've been talking about, we know how important culture is when it comes to how organizations operate, how they grow, how they scale, and how the individual teams within organizations are able to operate. And culture is such a huge topic right now. Sometimes it is being sort of put in a bucket of sort of just DEI, and it's more evolved, it's broader than that conversation. And so at its highest level, when we talk about the ways that people engage with each other, you've been really outspoken about how companies need to evolve. From your experience, what role does leadership play in shaping long-term cultural change?
Awesome. uh, couldn't agree more with what you said. If somebody is hearing the word culture and thinks DEI, that they're missing the boat of what culture is. The culture. So to answer your question, leadership plays a tremendous part of shaping the long-term culture. And I from and I think the way you phrase the question is super important, because it's dead on as well. Is shaping the culture, not defining, controlling the culture, right? Every person you hire on your team, regardless of gender, race, sex, anything whatsoever, they're culture additive to your team. You have added to your organism, and it changes because you just added to it. And same thing if you subtract from it, you have changed the dynamics there. So the important part of leadership there is to help to shape it. If things are going off the rails and all of a sudden people aren't as focused on the customer as they were, if that's your most important product, or they're not as focused on timeliness, or whatever is the biggest North Star metrics or core values for the org, you as a leader need to shape that. You
Mm-hmm.
and the leader need to to make sure that that is reinforced. This is our most important subsets of things, and you do it through your actions. You do it through not your words, but your actions. You as a leader need to demonstrate those values. You can't be seen as somebody that is on an ivory tower or has a double standard. Oh, leadership gets to do that. They get away with it. And we've all worked in those environments where, you know, somebody gets away with something because of their title, and that's just BS. That creates toxicity, and that's not leadership. That's just delinquency, in my opinion.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. And you know how I feel about the concept of culture add. It's, near and dear to our hearts. So we are again, yeah, aligned there. What do you think is one thing many leaders are overlooking when it's coming to creating that great, thriving workplace culture?
Um, I don't think that there's like one silver bullet associated to that, because their organism's different than my organism, right? And so, perhaps it's recognizing that I know, uh, and one of the things like I really reinforce with leaders that I hire on my team is, um, that same aspect, that Bruce Lee quote. I want you to bring in here what you know. I hired you for your experience, but don't just try to cookie cutter approach what you did at your
Hmm.
last job or what you see me doing. Uh, just to rinse and repeat, because we're a different organism. And so I know, I've seen that happen before. Another aspect is like I have kind of two requirements for anyone I hire, which is, I need to hear two things from them on a regular basis, and I need to hear I messed up, which is super important to me, because it lets me know that they were willing to make a mistake, because mistakes, are good. They're the way we
Yes.
learn, and it tells me we're evolving, and it also tells me they're accountable. Accountability, if I'm the one like, hey, Larry, dude, you totally dropped the ball over here. Yeah, I didn't want to mention that. No, no, no. Larry, I need to know that you know it. So tell me up front. So I messed up is number one. And number two is, Ken, you're wrong. I need my leaders to tell me when they disagree or when I've made a mistake, um, because that's the way I need to learn as well. And just because of my position, I that to our conversation earlier, this isn't about leading by authority. I don't want that. And if I hire leaders that see me in that role as leading by authority versus leading through influence and accountability, then I'm going to mess up.
Oh, that's so powerful because can you don't get the folks who say I messed up and can I disagree or can you're wrong. You don't get those folks if you don't cultivate, right, that team culture, you don't create that psychological safety, you don't set sort of those norms and expectations to create space for that to even happen. That's not something that we can dictate, right? That goes back to the authority versus influence. It has to be cultivated. I have to feel safe enough to say it or I'm always going to hide it or only tell you the small mistake and not the big mistake or whatever the case may be. That is so powerful. And I think to your point, the first thing you said, right, your organism might be different than mine, is that you have to recognize that, right? Knowing that there's leadership is all about agility. You have to be able to respond and bend and move and bob and weave and all the things, right? Based on the information that you have, the data that's coming in, the situation that you're in, all of those things. I think that stands out. This sort of cookie cutter approach is never going to be, and it's never a set it and forget it. Not with culture, not with life. It's never set it and forget it. Definitely not with culture. And I like to say when it comes to culture, you are either a culture taker. So I just come in and I try to conform to whatever happens, whatever's going on. You are a culture breaker. You just disrupting things and detracting from the good things that we have going on. Or you have committed to being a culture maker and you're trying with intention to add value, right? And elevate the way that that space, because culture is wherever two or more people come together consistently, that space, right?
Love it.
I love it. Which then brings me down because, there's company culture, but then there's always these smaller ecosystems that build into it, right? And so the individual teams are really important too, because you can't have a great company culture if you don't have that in the individual teams. And so you've worked with a lot of teams over the years. What do you think sets the high performing teams apart from the ones that sort of just get by?
Um, I think it's a mix of things. Number one, I would say, to your point, you have the smaller, call it team or departmental dynamics versus the company dynamics. There needs to be something consistent amongst them all. They can have their own identities, their own jokes, their own, emojis, whatever, but there needs to be a consistent theme of core values across the company. Otherwise, you're not all rowing in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
You can, you all need to be rowing in the same direction. And so the prioritization at my current company and my last company is customers number one. If at HostAway, our top core value is our customer success is our success, and it's very true. If we make the best product and service them in the best way, they are going to be the most successful at their own business, and in return, they're going to they're going to add more properties and more listings, which is HostAway's business, and then we all thrive together. And so by leaning into that, reinforcing to that, by hiring for that, promoting for that, and making sure that we recognize leaders that excel at that amongst our other values, it's super, super critical. So I would say it starts with core values. The next thing I would throw up on the list would be communication norms. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the the At HostAway, we have a very, very we have a ton of freedom that we give our team. Work from wherever you want. We're fully remote. We're in more than 40 countries, and for most roles, you can work the hours you want. And so there's a ton of flexibility across this, but we do have a hard rule around communication norms, and that is it starts with Slack. All of our internal communications are on Slack, but how we use Slack is also very structured and very some people, when they first start, feel it's a bit rigid because they're used to using Slack different with, they painted the canvas slightly different. But it's so important to how we function, to how we collaborate. This, 220 people spread around the globe need to collaborate in a structured way to be able to communicate, to share information, to get ideas, to get feedback. And so that would be the second thing. I think high performing teams need to have the core values, the communication, and lastly, accountability. So when you say you're going to deliver something, you're going to deliver it. When you say our goal is to, charge up this mountain or hit this KPI, you're charging for it. And the accountability for, we we hit it or we missed it, it sits with that team or that individual, and it needs to be reinforced. And I hope I've also been clear. Like, I'm not talking about you missed it, you're fired by any means. It's about you missed it. What did we learn? Let's improve on that and let's deliver it. Let's hit it next time. We want to encourage mistakes and learning and growth, and we do that by being able to measure it.
Yeah. The sort of ops background in me is like, let's learn more about this Slack channel and process. But no, we'll have that conversation on the side for sure. I am curious. We talked about teams, we talked about leaderships, we talked about newer managers, we talked about culture. When you think about leadership, are there any nuggets around the difference that we have to deploy when we are all remote versus how we have to show up as leaders, as team members to collaborate more effectively when we were in sort of the traditional environment in person.
Yeah, I definitely have a strong perspective on this. And the short answer is no. There is no difference. Like, if I think about what is super important for this, the answer is the same. The execution of it is the only thing that's different. You need to have, in order to have your teams hit the ground running and deliver strong, you need to have a great onboarding experience for your new employees, right? They need to have an understanding as to who does what are the functions of the company, what's our go-to-market motion or our sales motion or our customer support motion. You need to fully understand this. What are the processes? That starts with onboarding. Otherwise, a new person starts and they start misfiring left and right, and they're not effective, and they're uncomfortable, and you really diminish the potential. Um, you have clear definitions of ownership throughout this, who does what and how, what are those elements of success, if there's KPIs associated to it. You have frequent touch points with this new person to really say, how's it going? Let me give you this feedback. You have this open collaboration. So when you think about that, there's nothing there that is different between a remote company and an in-person company, right? Those both have to execute the exact same things. You got to take the new person in the company and really get them into an area where they can, really exploit their gifts, right? And that doesn't matter. That's the highest priority to being effective as a company. But in a remote perspective, yeah, um, today I'm working from northern Portugal in a remote town, and the aspects of I could have started when I started working for HostAway a year ago. It could have been from this town, and I I went for several months before I met anybody from that I worked with. So how do you get that person who's starting wherever they may be? And we have people in Kazakhstan and India and the Philippines and Kenya, and so how do you make sure you provide an experience that they can understand the org from their laptop? And so that's the mechanic that's different versus the in-person aspect.
Yeah, the mechanics are huge there, and because some of it is you don't see the struggle as it's not in your face because you're not right there, right? If we're not on a Zoom and you're just doing your own work, I don't see that you have a question or the struggle. And so how to making sure that we've created the space for you to feel comfortable and safe to ask the question and reach out and build connections when there is no, water cooler, there is no we're all running out for lunch together. Come on, new guy, let's come with us, right? That's not happening. How do you create it in a way that doesn't feel forced and folks don't feel like, oh, here's another Zoom for me to sit here and write and pretend and do small talk? But you can, it's doable, right? It totally is doable.
But it's very doable, but also also having, I know you've worked in the corporate world and in a traditional office space environment, as have I, and I'll tell you, there I never got a really big sense of community or culture in those offices, and the only people I could really reach out to were those that were kind of sitting around me, or if there's a meeting called in the conference room. Um,
Mhm.
so honestly, I think when we start really thinking about this, because I know there's a lot of conversation of how do you build culture in remote, that must be really hard. My first question to them is, do you really have a culture in your office? And the answer
Mhm.
9 times out of 10 is no. The culture is I go in there and once a month there's somebody's birthday and we have that and we go out to lunch occasionally or whatever. So I think sometimes it gets overplayed, but it's so important then to think about how do you change not just what didn't work in the office, which typically isn't a strong culture, and you apply the different mechanics that you
Yeah.
have to apply. So it does take a lot of intentional thinking and forethought.
Yeah. Oh, I love the intentionality of it. Yeah, that is powerful. And that's a great call out, right? Because you in the office, it's who you know, who's like you, all the things, and it's still harder to get get those deeper conversations, those deeper opportunities to meet people that you're not regularly working with, it's still hard, it's still awkward. And in a remote space where we're all saying we know we need this, it's easier to throw a 15-minute chat or let me get to know you a little bit better. It's easier to pop that on someone's calendar or make that request because everyone's craving some of that connection too. And we know that's the only way that it can be facilitated. That's such a great call out. So, Ken, leadership is evolving. The world is in an uproar these days. We're facing so much change, so much uncertainty. What is your best advice to leaders navigating this space these days, navigating uncertainty, and how they navigate it for themselves, but also support their teams?
Yeah, there's a ton of change in the world. The I would say first off, don't fight it because you can't. You're going to lose. The change is happening, so you got to figure out how to play within the ever changing rules. And so I would say two things. Number one, a big mistake I've made is during these times of change or immense growth is be careful to delegate, not abdicate.
Mhm.
And so, with things that are changing so fast, yes, you might have a team, and yes, they might be awesome or experts and further much more than you. That's why you want to hire a great leader needs to hire people that are more powerful than them and more skilled in depth. But that doesn't mean that you abdicate
Mhm.
your responsibility. You, at the end of the day, are the ultimate accountability aspect for what's going on. You need to stay in touch. You need to stay in tune, and you need to do it in a way that's supportive of your team and also making sure that that in doing so you understand what's going
Yeah.
on. And this is a mistake I've made in the past, and especially during those times of immense growth and everything's happening so fast. Oh, Sally's got it. Oh, Larry's got it. But the answer is they might have it and they need to have it. You need your leaders to do that, but you need to understand it. Otherwise, what happens when Sally's sick? What
Mhm.
happens when Sally gets another job? Um, if you don't understand what's going on, then you're going to be in trouble when that happens, or if they need help. So that would be one point. And then another point I would just add is, um, and it goes along the same theme of that we've been talking about, Danny, which is you want to make sure that you're a leader, not a manager.
Mhm.
And it's a small, might sound semantic or just a nitpicky change in terms, but if you think about managing something, it is really more tighter control and versus an inspiring and empowering person that really helps to encourage that, or somebody who's on the management side that's really focused on process procedure without looking at what are the possibilities for deviations and
Mhm.
creativity within that process that doesn't break things, right? It's a difference between working in the system as a manager and working on the system as a leader. I think those are just critical things that we as leaders need to continue to pay attention to.
Yeah, I love that call out between the difference of leaders and managers, and even as we were talking earlier about sort of new managers and their evolution and growth, and I think that there is some nuance to that around how do you inspire others versus how do you ensure that the work is getting done to the standard that we need it to be done to. And there's like some skills that I think sometimes we skip and we go straight to higher level visionary leadership conversations, and we've not figured out how to at the team level really lead that particular team, those individuals. And once you've done that, then you get to elevate and expand your perspective, expand your reach and your impact in the organization. I love that call out. We talk about it too in various ways. So I love that call out. Okay, I'm wrapping up. We've had such a great talk. I could talk for go on and on and on. There's so many things I want to double tap into. But If you had to leave leaders with just one piece of advice or insight following our conversation, what would it be?
Be a lifelong learner. Uh, there's so much out there. As you mentioned, the world's changing really, really fast. Sometimes that's good change, sometimes it's bad change. You can always learn from that change. So I would say be a lifelong learner. Find, if you're a reader, there's incredible stuff out there.
Mm.
Um, have a diverse diet. If you're a podcast fanatic, awesome. Same thing. Have a diverse diet. Get out of your bubbles. Get out of your fixed positions because the opposition or other aspects always has something to teach you. So that would be my advice.
Oh, I love it. Get out of your bubbles, be diverse with what you're learning, but really focus and make sure that you're really intentional about always being curious and always learning. Such amazing, amazing, great advice. Such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing your time, sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your insights. Is there a way, is there a place where can folks stay connected with you if they want to follow your journey, learn more about you?
Best place is LinkedIn. Just Ken Weary, just like it sounds. Weary on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, and I tend to post my thoughts there once a week or so.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you again so much, Ken. This has been such a phenomenal conversation. I know that it's going to be powerful and insightful for all those who are able to experience it. And until next time, thank you for joining us for the Leadership Refinery.
Thanks so much. Always great to catch up, Danny.